It was a cold Monday morning in the city, the kind of morning where the air felt sharp against the skin, and everyone walked a little faster just to escape it. The tall glass building stood like a giant mirror against the gray sky, filled with offices where important decisions were made and big deals were signed. But at the very bottom floor, life moved differently. In the quiet of the early morning, before most employees even arrived, a woman in a simple navy blue uniform pushed a cleaning cart down the long marble hallway. Her name was Olivia. She had been working in this building for 6 years, quietly taking care of the floors, the restrooms, the corners no one noticed. People rushed past her every day, carrying laptops, talking into phones, and most of the time, they didn't even look her way. She had learned to accept it. Olivia's life outside the building was busy. She lived in a small apartment with her teenage daughter, who was in her first year of college. Every morning, she woke up before the sun, packed her daughter's lunch, and caught the first bus to work. Her pay wasn't much, but it kept the lights on and helped cover her daughter's school fees. It wasn't easy, but Olivia didn't complain. She was proud that she was doing it on her own. On the top floor of the building, things were very different. Daniel Whitmore, the CEO of a leading tech company, was already late for the most important investor meeting of the year. He was dressed in a crisp gray suit, his tie slightly loose, a fresh cup of coffee in one hand, and his phone pressed tightly against his ear. His voice was low, but sharp as he spoke to someone on the other end. Numbers, deadlines, contracts, that was his world. He was used to making fast decisions, moving quickly, never wasting a second. Daniel's morning had been chaotic. He had woken up late after a restless night, and his driver had been stuck in traffic. By the time he reached the lobby, the meeting was already minutes away from starting. Every second counted. He wasn't thinking about anything except the presentation on the top floor and the investors waiting for him. That's when it happened. As Daniel turned a corner in the hallway, his focus still locked on his phone call, he didn't notice Olivia just ahead of him. She was kneeling slightly, mopping a section of the floor she had just cleaned, her cart parked nearby. The hallway was quiet, the sound of the mop swishing softly against the marble. Daniel's shoes clicked quickly as he moved toward the elevator, and in the next second, his arm brushed against the cart. The coffee cup tilted dangerously in his hand. Before he could react, the lid popped off, and a wave of warm coffee splashed across the floor and onto Olivia's uniform. She let out a small gasp, looking down at the dark stains spreading over her sleeve and apron. It wasn't painful. The coffee had cooled slightly, but it was messy and humiliating. Daniel froze for half a second, glancing at her, but still holding the phone to his ear. "Sorry, I'm in a rush," he muttered quickly, his words clipped, before stepping around the spill and heading straight into the waiting elevator. The doors closed behind him with a soft ding, and he was gone. Olivia stood there, mop in one hand, her heart sinking. She had been spoken to like that before, rushed, brushed aside, treated like part of the background. But somehow, this morning felt worse. She could still smell the strong coffee on her sleeve, feel the warmth fading into the cold fabric. She glanced at the puddle on the floor, at the coffee dripping from her apron, and sighed. She quietly wheeled her cart to a supply closet to fetch a clean rag. She didn't have the luxury of getting angry. The floors still needed to be cleaned, the trash collected, the restrooms checked. And besides, in her job, you learned early that making a scene never helped. People came and went in a hurry, and she stayed day after day, unseen. By the time Daniel reached his office, the whole incident was already fading from his mind. He had bigger problems to think about, slides to present, questions to answer, investors to convince. To him, it had been nothing more than a small, forgettable accident in a busy morning. He didn't think about the woman whose uniform he'd stained or the look on her face when he walked away. But for Olivia, the moment stayed with her for the rest of the day. As she worked, she thought about how easily people could overlook someone else's feelings. She wasn't angry, not really. She knew people like him had busy lives, heavy responsibilities. But she also believed that kindness didn't take much time. A few seconds to say something more, a little effort to see the other person. It could make a difference. That afternoon, when the offices were quieter and the coffee smell had finally faded from her clothes, Olivia sat for a moment in the janitor's break room. She looked at her hands, still smelling faintly of cleaning solution, and took a slow sip from her own thermos. The warm tea soothed her throat, and she tried to shake off the heaviness in her chest. It was just another day at work. Nothing new. Still, somewhere deep inside, she wished that someday someone might look past the uniform and see the person wearing it. She didn't know it yet, but that tiny, forgettable moment in the hallway, the spill, the muttered apology, the silent walk to the elevator, was about to set in motion a chain of events that would change her life in ways she could never imagine. 2 days later, the morning started just like any other. The lobby smelled faintly of fresh polish, and the hum of early conversations floated through the air. Olivia was cleaning the glass doors at the main entrance when a sharp, sudden sound cut through the quiet. The fire alarm. The piercing ring made people jump. Lights above the hallway began to flash red, and a calm but firm voice came over the speaker system, instructing everyone to evacuate the building. Olivia grabbed her cleaning cart and moved it to the side so no one would trip, then headed toward the stairwell. She had been through drills before, but this one felt different. People were rushing out faster than usual, some clutching their bags, others still on their phones. Up on the higher floors, Daniel was just finishing a call when the alarm blared in his office. He frowned, annoyed, but knew he had to leave. His assistant quickly handed him his coat, and they joined the line of people heading toward the stairs. But in the confusion, Daniel took the wrong stairwell exit and ended up in the same one Olivia had chosen. The door closed behind him, and they were suddenly in a narrow space with only a handful of people. A moment later, the others hurried ahead, leaving just the two of them moving at the same pace. The air in the stairwell was cool and smelled faintly of metal. Olivia kept her eyes forward, but she was aware of the tall man in the sharp suit beside her. She recognized him immediately, the same man who had spilled coffee on her without more than a quick apology. Daniel glanced at her and, for the first time, seemed to actually notice her face. Without the chaos of a morning rush, he saw the faint lines of tiredness under her eyes, the way she carried herself with quiet patience. He broke the silence. "Sorry about the rush," he said, his voice softer this time. "I didn't expect to be stuck in here." Olivia gave a polite nod. "Happens sometimes. Fire drills, alarms, this building loves surprises." He gave a small chuckle, and for a few seconds, they walked in silence again. The stairwell was echoing with distant footsteps from other floors. "You work here full-time?" Daniel asked after a pause. "Yes," Olivia said simply. "Been here for a while now. Mostly nights, sometimes early mornings." "That's a long time," he replied, sounding almost surprised. "Must be tough." Olivia shrugged. "It's work. I've got a daughter in college, so every shift counts." Something about the way she said it, not with self-pity, but with quiet pride, stayed with him. He found himself wanting to ask more, but before he could, they reached the ground floor. The exit doors were open, letting in a gust of cold air, and security guards waved them toward the assembly point outside. They stood among the crowd for a few minutes, watching firefighters check the building. It turned out to be a false alarm, and soon people began filing back in. Daniel glanced at Olivia before they went their separate ways. "Take care," he said. "You too," she replied, giving a faint smile. It was a short exchange, but as Daniel walked away, he realized something had shifted. For the first time, she wasn't just the janitor in his mind. She was a person with a story, and he wanted to know more. What he didn't realize was that this small moment of connection was just the first step toward something that would change both their lives in ways neither of them could predict. A week later, the office building was quieter than usual in the early afternoon. The sky outside was heavy with clouds, casting a soft gray light through the tall windows. Olivia was in the staff break room, taking her short lunch break. She had about 15 minutes before she needed to be back on her floor, so she unwrapped her sandwich and sat at the far corner of the table. Beside her lunch tray was a small stack of scrap paper she had taken from the recycling bin earlier in the day. The backs were blank, and Olivia liked to use them for doodling during her breaks. It was a habit she'd had for years, ever since she was a teenager who dreamed of becoming an artist. Her hand moved quickly over the paper, the pencil making soft, quick strokes. A city skyline began to form, buildings rising in the distance, with tiny windows drawn in detail. Then she added a park in the foreground, a few benches, the suggestion of people walking. There was something peaceful about it, even though the city was busy in her drawing. She didn't notice when the door to the break room opened. Daniel had been passing by and stopped in when he saw someone inside. He wasn't expecting to see her there, head bent over the table, completely focused on her work. For a moment, he stood quietly, watching. The sketch on the paper caught his eye. The lines were clean and confident, the perspective perfect. It wasn't the kind of quick doodle most people made in their spare time. It looked like the work of someone who truly knew what they were doing. "That's really good," he said finally. Olivia looked up, startled. She hadn't even heard him come in. "Oh, it's nothing," she said quickly, putting her hand over the paper as if embarrassed. Daniel stepped closer. "No, really. That's amazing. Did you study art?" She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "A long time ago. I wanted to be an illustrator. But life happened. My dad got sick, I had to leave school, then I had my daughter. And, well, art doesn't exactly pay the bills when you've got rent and tuition to cover." There was no bitterness in her voice, just a quiet acceptance. Still, Daniel felt something twist inside him. He had spent years surrounded by people chasing their dreams without worrying about money. Yet here was someone with real talent who had been forced to set hers aside. "Do you still draw often?" he asked. Olivia smiled faintly. "Not much. Just on my breaks, when I have a few minutes. It's my little escape, I guess." Daniel nodded, still looking at the drawing. "You know, people would love this. You could sell pieces like this." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "I'm just the janitor here. No one's going to buy my sketches." Something about that answer stayed with him long after he left the break room. As he walked back to his office, he kept picturing the way she bent over the paper, completely absorbed in her work, like the rest of the world had disappeared. Daniel didn't know why he cared so much. Maybe it was guilt from the coffee spill, maybe it was the brief conversation in the stairwell, or maybe it was simply that he admired how she had carried herself without bitterness. But one thought kept circling in his mind. She deserved a chance. Over the next few days, Daniel found himself thinking about Olivia's drawings more than he expected. In the middle of meetings, during his morning coffee, even while driving home, the image of her sitting in that break room sketching kept coming back to him. It wasn't just the art, it was the quiet dedication in the way she drew, the way her hands moved with confidence, even though she hadn't studied in years. One afternoon, Daniel had a meeting with his events coordinator to plan the company's upcoming corporate gala. It was a big annual event. Investors, partners, and important clients all gathered in the main hall for speeches, awards, and a touch of networking over fancy hors d'oeuvres. Usually, the walls were decorated with generic, abstract paintings rented from a local supplier. But as they discussed this year's decor, Daniel suddenly had an idea. "What if we feature something different this time?" he said. "Something more personal, unique." The coordinator tilted her head. "Like what?" "Artwork," Daniel said, "but not from the usual places. I know someone whose work deserves to be seen." He didn't tell her who, not yet. Instead, he gave instructions to prepare part of the venue to display framed pieces. Then, without saying a word to Olivia, he quietly asked the building's security if they could help him get copies of some of her sketches. He didn't want to take them without permission, so he arranged to find them by offering her fresh paper in exchange for the ones she had already drawn. Within a week, he had 10 of her best sketches scanned, printed on high-quality paper, and mounted in simple, elegant frames. Seeing them professionally presented made them look even more impressive, the kind of work you'd expect to find in a gallery, not tucked away on a break room table. The night of the gala arrived. The main hall glowed under soft golden lights, the clink of glasses and gentle music filling the air. Guests mingled, smiling politely as they looked around the room. And right at the far wall, under a spotlight, Olivia's art hung proudly in a neat row. A small card beneath each piece simply read, artist, Olivia. While the event buzzed with conversation, Daniel kept glancing at the entrance, waiting for her. He had arranged for her to work a short cleaning shift that night, so she would come into the hall after everyone was already inside. When Olivia finally stepped through the side door, mop and bucket in hand, she froze. Her eyes swept across the room, landing on the wall with her sketches. She blinked, almost as if she didn't trust what she was seeing. For a moment, she didn't move at all. Daniel watched from a distance as she slowly walked closer to the display. Guests were standing nearby, pointing at the pieces and talking about the detail, the emotion in the lines. A woman in a silver dress turned to Olivia, without realizing she was the artist, and said, "Aren't these beautiful? I'd love to know who made them." Olivia's throat felt tight. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely audible. Daniel stepped forward then, smiling. "I think the artist is standing right here," he said, his voice warm. She turned to him, eyes wide. You did this?" "Not really," he replied. "You did this. I just made sure the right people could see it." Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at the frames again. She had never imagined her art hanging in a place like this, surrounded by people in expensive clothes, admired like it mattered. And in that moment, something inside her began to shift. As the evening went on, more and more people drifted toward the wall, where Olivia's artwork hung. Some studied the pieces closely, leaning in to see the tiny details in the lines. Others stood back to take in the full scene, pointing out their favorite parts to the person beside them. Olivia didn't quite know what to do with herself. She stood a little to the side, watching strangers admire the work she had made during quiet breaks, work she had never thought would matter to anyone but herself. It felt strange and wonderful at the same time, like watching a secret part of her heart suddenly out in the open for the world to see. A man in a dark blue suit approached Daniel. "These are incredible," he said, gesturing toward the sketches. "Where did you find this artist?" "I run a small gallery downtown, and I'd love to talk about featuring her work." Daniel smiled, glancing at Olivia. "She's right here. Olivia, meet Mark." Olivia's eyes widened. "Oh, hi," she said, shaking his hand nervously. Mark was enthusiastic. "I'm serious, you have a gift. Your lines are clean, but full of emotion. It's rare to see work that feels this alive. Would you be open to doing a small exhibition? We could start with 10 to 15 pieces." Her heart was pounding. I've never done anything like that," she admitted. "That's fine," Mark said warmly. "We'll guide you through it. People need to see this." Before she could process what was happening, another guest, a woman in a green dress, approached to ask if she could purchase one of the framed prints on the spot. Soon after, a couple more people expressed interest in buying her work. Olivia felt like she was in a dream, nodding and smiling, trying not to let her voice shake when she spoke. Daniel stayed nearby, letting her have the spotlight, but quietly making sure she felt supported. At one point, he caught her eye and gave her a small nod, as if to say, "See? I told you they'd love it." By the end of the evening, Olivia had sold 3 prints and exchanged contact information with several people who wanted to commission drawings. Mark from the gallery gave her his card, telling her to call him within the week to set up a meeting. When the crowd began to thin and the music softened, Olivia finally had a moment to take a deep breath. She stood in front of her artwork one last time, looking at the neat row of frames, each one carrying a piece of her, pieces she had once thought would stay hidden forever. She turned to Daniel. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. He shook his head. "You don't have to. You did all the hard work. I just opened a door." For a long moment, she just looked at him, her eyes shining. "You have no idea what this means to me." Daniel smiled. "Maybe not, but I think I have an idea of where it could lead." And as she walked out into the cool night air, holding the gallery owner's card in her hand, Olivia realized her life might never be the same again. The following week felt like a whirlwind. Olivia met with Mark, the gallery owner, and together they chose a date for her first small exhibition. She spent her days working her regular shifts and her nights hunched over her small kitchen table, sketching until her hand ached. The apartment was filled with the sound of pencil on paper, the faint scent of eraser shavings, and the quiet hum of hope. Her daughter would often peek into the kitchen after finishing her homework. "They're beautiful, Mom," she would say, leaning over to study the lines. And Olivia would smile, her heart swelling with both pride and disbelief. When the exhibition day arrived, Olivia stood in the middle of the gallery, surrounded by her framed pieces. The walls, once bare, now carried scenes of city streets, old wooden benches, quiet rivers under evening skies, all born from her mind and her pencil. She wore a simple dress and a nervous smile, feeling almost out of place among the clinking glasses and murmured conversations. But then something magical happened. People began approaching her, strangers, friends of friends, even a few from the gala, asking about the stories behind her drawings. She spoke about the moments that inspired each piece. The street corner she passed every day on her way to the bus, the park where she used to take her daughter when she was little, the bridge she had once stood on just to watch the sunset. By the end of the night, she had sold several pieces and received more commissions than she had ever dreamed possible. Mark pulled her aside, grinning. "This is just the beginning," he told her. Over the next few months, Olivia's life began to change. She reduced her cleaning shifts, taking on more art projects. The apartment's small kitchen table was replaced with a sturdy wooden desk, covered in fresh supplies. The tiredness in her eyes slowly faded, replaced by something brighter, purpose. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by the gallery to see her latest work. She was standing by a window, sunlight spilling across her drawings. He smiled as he walked up. "Looks like you've been busy," he said. She laughed softly. "Busier than I've ever been, but in the best way." There was a pause, and then she added, "When you spilled coffee on me that morning, I thought it was just another bad day. I never imagined it would lead to this." Daniel chuckled. "Neither did I. But I guess sometimes the smallest moments, they end up changing everything." She looked around the gallery, the walls filled with her work, and nodded. "Yes, everything." And as she picked up her pencil again, ready to start a new sketch, Olivia knew her life had turned a corner. She was no longer just the woman in the navy blue uniform cleaning the marble floors. She was an artist, and her story was only just beginning.